to extend the deadline by which we have to count the votes. They filed that unbeknownst to us. We stumbled upon that information. We are now in a hearing right now with both political parties and the judge. That's where Ms. Longoria is right now. And in the meantime, we're in a holding pattern until we hear what the court has to say.
So all the votes were not counted then before 7 p.m.?
That's right. So the Central County Board is still reviewing some of the ballots, and so we are in a holding pattern until we hear from the court.
Oh, so that was because of the injunction lawsuit?
Yeah, it's not even quite an injunction. It is that the Republican Party filed this with the court, and so the Central County Station personnel, which are of both political parties, have decided to stop until we hear from the court, and so we are abiding by that.
So it wasn't that we weren't done by 7 a.m. This happened, so you stopped.
Right, we were still counting, and then both political parties stopped. That's right.
Is there a way to put a number as to how many locations, precincts, or votes you still have to count?
I think votes is the easiest one. We're talking under 1,000, 1,500 votes. So we're talking a small amount, but every vote, as you all know, is extremely important to the person who cast that. And so we are committed to continuing that count as soon as we hear from the court.
And where was it filed?
In district court in Harris County.
And what time?
About 6 o'clock.
Do you believe you would have made the 7 p.m. deadline if that petition had not been filed?
I think it's really difficult for us to say because we don't know because of intervening circumstances.
Have all of the machines been returned?
All of the equipment,
Yes.
As far as I know, that's correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically, the elections folks stopped counting at around the time that the petition was filed, and you're now in a hearing over this petition.
Yes, Ms. Longoria is sitting in that hearing right now, waiting to hear back from the judge.
In terms of the process, you guys have faced some criticism over the amount of time it's taken. Did you run into any issues, and if so, what were those issues?
So we've talked about this earlier today. Harris County moved to paper ballots within the last year. This is our first election for voters for the Harris County Elections Office and for the political parties to use paper ballots in an election. We know it is a best practice across the country. It is verifiable by the voter what their vote was and what the machine is going to read to count their vote. And so we know it's best practice. Paper takes a little bit longer. And so we also know that the entire state is going to be moving to a paper-based system within the next few years because it's required by law now. And so what we're seeing is us doing our checks and balances, crossing our T's and dotting our I's to make sure that every vote is properly brought in, presented to central count, and then counted appropriately.
And can you clarify, I know you said when the petition was filed is when you stopped counting. Do you have an approximate time when you stopped counting here?
I think the political parties stopped at slightly different times, but it was within that hour or so after the party, or hour after the petition was filed. And 6 o'clock, again, is still that's when we found out about it. I don't know that they filed it right then.
So what time would you say the two parties stopped counting?
Within that hour, between 6 and 7.
The last hour?
Yes, sir.
The Republican Party here had also put out a statement lobbying some criticism towards the election administrator about how things were, or about some issues that I guess some voters had throughout the day. Have you guys seen that statement, and can you respond to it?
I have not seen that statement. If you'll give me a little bit of the background, I'm happy to try to respond.
With all this stuff going on, are you guys ever worried that you're going to be arrested over this?
So there are, in fact, criminal penalties associated with some of these rules. We know that the Texas Election Code has been some of the strictest voting rules in the entire country, and that was pre-SB1. And so SB1 has tightened that down even more. And quite frankly, we've seen election officials, so people who have been judges before, been clerks before, decline to do that anymore because of their fear of repercussions related to tightening of the voting laws. And so it is true that our elections administrator has cause for concern for being arrested or charged with civil penalties, and that is real, and it really stifles her ability to do things like encourage people to vote by mail. And it's a real shame, but it is true that she has to face that on a daily basis as a public servant for Harris County.
Are the Democrats also part of this hearing that the administrator is in right now?
Yes, it's my understanding they are in that hearing as well.
So both parties are in that hearing?
Yes, although it was, yeah, I think we talked about before the contemplated filing of a potential request for court order with both parties. It is my understanding this was only sought by the Republican Party.
And if the judge doesn't extend the time to count the votes, what happens to those 1,500 votes?
I think we have to do an analysis and have a conversation with our county attorney on what the next steps are, depending on what the court tells us here, hopefully in a little bit.
And so are most of the remaining votes, are they related to the ones that were tabulated incorrectly because of human error?
So they weren't tabulated incorrectly. There's a machine at the polling location that accepts the paper ballots through it, and sometimes that doesn't work exactly perfectly. And the central count team, both political parties, review those ballots. Those are the ones that we're talking about. So not mistabulated, rather designated for review by the board.
Well, you're being quoted in the Chronicle as saying we're not read properly by the machines. Is that how you describe it?
So, and by the machines at the polling location, so not read properly there, but tabulation is something that happens at central count. That's when they are counted.
Okay. Are those the remaining ballots that we're talking about right now that
I believe,
still need to count?
I would have to go check, but I believe that is the majority of what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Any idea how long this hearing is going to go on for?
We have no way to know. I'm not sure what the judge is asking of either the parties or Ms. Longoria at this point.
You said you have about 1,500 ballots that you need to count. How long would that take if they let you just count them right now?
And let me caveat a little bit. That is a guesstimate based on visually looking at the paperwork. But it should not take that much longer. It does require the board themselves to look at the ballots. And so that's where, it might take one person 30 seconds to look. It might take another 2 minutes. And so we have to give room for that. And so it's my understanding that the Republican Party has asked for at least several hours. I don't know that it will require that, but I think that that's what they've asked for.
And if there was a decision in the next 5 minutes, would you be able to come back out here and
Sure.
and tell us?
Absolutely.
Or do you think it'd be better if everybody packs up and just goes?
Well, we're happy to update you when we hear from the court.
I mean, certainly if y'all have my cell phone number on the
Yeah.
whiteboard, if y'all want to call, because this hearing in Beth is going to be needed back there right now.
Yeah.
It could take time, but follow up with me directly if y'all want me to hang out.
You had sort of alluded to this before, but I had asked the Secretary of State's office this question as well, which is what is the consequence of not meeting that 7 p.m. deadline? Assuming all this other stuff hadn't happened, what would be the consequence of not meeting that 7 p.m. deadline?
Well, the consequence, according to the Secretary of State's office and according apparently to the political party, would be that those votes wouldn't count. I am not committing our office to that interpretation of the election code, and rather would defer to the county attorney on that. But that is what they have said would be the consequence. Let me be very clear. Our office is committed to counting every single one of those votes in connection with the political party's decision on a particular vote-by-vote basis.
Can I have your full name and title again?
Sure. Beth Stevens, Chief Director of Voting for the Harris County Elections Administrator.
And Beth, do you know, I know you said that was an estimate at 1,500 or so. Do you have a breakdown on that? If most of those are Democrat or Republican, or do you not know?
It really looks like they both have about the same amount visually. Yeah.
You got to grab her and pull her back. Is that okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Just follow up with me on my cell.
Can
Is that
we get
good?
your number, please?
Yeah. It's on the whiteboard in the break room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.